There is a particular kind of darkness that exists beneath palaces. Not the darkness of neglect. Not the darkness of forgetting. But the deliberate, carefully maintained darkness of something being preserved. Deep beneath the foundations of Buckingham Palace, in temperature-controlled rooms that most people will never see, sit hundreds of objects that have outlasted empires, survived revolutions, and crossed oceans in the pockets of fleeing royals. Crowns, necklaces, tiaras that once rested on the heads of empresses, whose kingdoms no longer exist on any map. For 70 years one woman held the keys to all of it. Queen Elizabeth II ascended the throne in 1952 at the age of 25, and from that moment forward, she became not just a monarch but a custodian. A steward of objects that did not truly belong to her, objects that belonged, in the deepest sense, to the institution of the monarchy itself, and to whoever would come next. What historians and royal observers have come to understand only recently, now that we can trace the pattern of what Catherine, Princess of Wales, has been wearing since her marriage in 2011, is that Elizabeth was not simply storing these treasures. She was selecting. Piece by piece, decade by decade, she was building an inheritance, a curated collection of sleeping beauties, each one chosen for a woman she would never truly know, but somehow understood perfectly. This is the story of that inheritance. This is the story of the Queen's last wish. To understand why Queen Elizabeth withheld so much, you first have to understand the woman herself. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was not a natural extrovert. By all accounts, from biographers including Sally Bedell Smith, whose exhaustive 2012 biography Elizabeth the Queen drew on hundreds of interviews with palace insiders, the Queen was a woman of profound private emotions and very public discipline. She understood, perhaps better than any monarch before her, that the crown itself was the spectacle. The woman wearing it was secondary. This philosophy shaped everything about her public presentation. The block colors so that crowds could spot her at a distance. The firm smile, the raised glove, the carefully modulated wave. And the jewelry, always the jewelry, chosen not for personal expression, but for institutional communication. When she wore the imperial state crown, she was speaking as the sovereign. When she wore the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, her most frequently worn tiara, gifted to her grandmother Queen Mary by a committee of aristocratic women in 1893, she was signaling a specific level of formality to a visiting dignitary. The jewelry was a language, and Elizabeth spoke it fluently, but narrowly. She found her vocabulary early and she stuck to it. 3-strand pearl necklaces from the Mikimoto collection, gifted by the Japanese government. The Greville chandelier earrings for particularly grand occasions. The diamond demi-parure she wore with such regularity that it became as much a part of her identity as the handbag on her arm. These were her words. Everything else, the wilder vocabulary, the more expressive grammar, she set aside. But here is what is crucial to understand. She did not set it aside carelessly. She set it aside intentionally. Royal historian Hugo Vickers, who has written extensively on the British royal family, has noted that Elizabeth had a comprehensive, near-encyclopedic knowledge of every piece in the royal collection. She knew the provenance of objects that had not been worn in 40 years. She knew which pieces had been altered, which had been damaged and repaired, which carried emotional weight that made them impossible to wear in certain company. She was not indifferent to these sleeping treasures. She was their guardian. And guardians by definition keep things safe for someone else. Catherine Elizabeth Middleton was born on January 9, 1982, in Reading, Berkshire, to Michael and Carol Middleton, a former flight dispatcher and a former flight attendant who had built a successful party supply company called Party Pieces. She was, by every definition, ordinary. Beautifully, thoroughly, strategically ordinary. She attended Marlborough College, studied art history at the University of St. Andrews, and met Prince William in the first weeks of their shared university experience in 2001. By the time their engagement was announced in November 2010, the British public had had nearly a decade to form an opinion of her, and the opinion was overwhelmingly warm. She was poised. She was private. She had, as palace insiders would later note, an extraordinary capacity for stillness in situations that would unsettle most people. She could stand on a balcony before a crowd of hundreds of thousands and appear not merely composed but present. These qualities did not go unnoticed by the Queen. What Elizabeth saw in Catherine, What she assessed over years of quiet observation, as any grandmother-in-law would assess the woman chosen by her beloved grandson, was a woman built for the long game. Not a sprinter, a marathon runner. Someone who understood that the monarchy was not a role you performed, but a life you inhabited. And that recognition, according to those close to the royal family, was what unlocked the vault. Not all at once, not with ceremony, but gradually, carefully, and with extraordinary precision, the Queen began transferring pieces from her own unspoken archive to the woman who would one day be Queen Consort. Each transfer was a message. Each piece told a story. And together, they form what may be the most carefully constructed jewelry inheritance in the history of the British monarchy. Let us begin with the most dramatic resurrection. In November 2023, Catherine arrived at Buckingham Palace for a state banquet honoring South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. The evening was notable for several reasons, but what stopped royal observers cold was what sat on the Princess of Wales' head. The Strathmore Rose tiara. A piece that had been, for all practical purposes, missing from public life for nearly a century. Its origins lie in one of the most consequential weddings of the 20th century. In April 1923, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, a 22-year-old Scottish aristocrat who had already once turned down a marriage proposal from the Duke of York before eventually accepting him, married her Duke at Westminster Abbey. Her father, Claude Bowes-Lyon, the 14th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, commissioned a wedding gift that would reflect his daughter's nature. Gentle, floral, essentially English in the best possible sense. The resulting piece was a garland of wild roses rendered in diamonds, designed by the jeweler's Boucheron. It could be worn in two configurations, low across the forehead in the bandeau style fashionable among flappers of the 1920s, or elevated in the more traditional tiara position. The young Duchess of York wore it constantly in those first happy years of her marriage. Then history intervened. The abdication crisis of 1936 transformed Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon into Queen Consort, and the Strathmore Rose into a relic of a simpler time. The new queen needed grander apparatus. The Kohinoor diamond set into the crown. The Greville tiara with its arching diamond profusion. The wild roses were packed into their velvet case and moved into storage. When Queen Elizabeth II inherited the full royal collection, she had access to this piece for her entire reign, 70 years during which it never appeared at a single public engagement. The Queen's style was architectural, not floral, geometric, not organic. The roses had no place in her visual language, and so they waited. That Catherine was chosen to revive this specific piece is not accidental. The parallel is almost too deliberate. Like the Queen Mother in 1923, Catherine was a young woman of non-royal birth who married into the family and transformed it through her warmth and her unaffected English charm. She was not born into a castle. She made her own way there. The Strathmore Rose, a gift from a father to a daughter on the occasion of her transformation from ordinary aristocrat to future queen, carries exactly that narrative. By placing it on Catherine's head in 2023, King Charles was completing a sentence his mother had started decades earlier. There are pieces in the royal collection that represent not just beauty, but geopolitical relationships, material expressions of alliances, dependencies, and the long, complicated history of the British Empire. The Nizam of Hyderabad necklace is one such piece. In 1947, as Britain was still counting its dead and rebuilding its bombed cities, Mir Osman Ali Khan, the last Nizam of Hyderabad and at the time by several estimates the wealthiest man in the world, decided to mark the engagement of Princess Elizabeth to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten with a gift of historic generosity. His instructions to Cartier's London showroom were essentially open-ended. Let the princess choose. What she selected was a necklace of extraordinary technical complexity, a platinum openwork collar set with 43 baguette and brilliant cut diamonds, featuring a detachable double pendant drop set with two of the finest emerald-cut stones in the collection. The craftsmanship was, even by Cartier's standards, exceptional. In the early years of her reign, the young queen wore it at major state occasions. It was, unmistakably, the piece you reached for when you needed to project the full weight of British imperial grandeur. We have those early portraits of her, young and composed, with this river of diamonds sitting at her throat. Then, gradually, it disappeared from her public appearances. The reasons, as interpreted by royal biographers, are multiple. The sheer physical weight of the necklace becomes more challenging as one ages. But the symbolic weight may have mattered more. To wear the richest man in the world's wedding gift, in an era of post-colonial reconsideration and growing democratic sensibility, was to invite a conversation the palace was not always eager to have. The necklace retreated. When Catherine wore it in 2014, at a National Portrait Gallery engagement, the choice was electrifying precisely because of what it communicated: that the new generation of the monarchy was confident enough to wear history without being crushed by it. The Queen had authorized the loan as a statement of the deepest institutional trust, the kind that says, "I believe you can carry what I no longer can." Not everything the Queen withheld was withheld out of stylistic disagreement. Some pieces were simply uncomfortable. And comfort, for a woman who wore ceremonial dress for 70 years, was not a trivial consideration. The Japanese pearl choker has one of the stranger journeys in the royal collection. During a state visit to Japan in the 1970s, the Queen was presented with a set of cultured pearls of exceptional quality. Protocol required their use. The resulting commission from Gerard produced a 4-strand choker set on a diamond clasp, elegant and technically flawless. The Queen wore it twice and then quietly retired it. She found chokers physically uncomfortable. Her preference throughout her reign was for necklaces that sat lower, allowing what she described to close associates as room to breathe. Enter Diana. In 1982, the Queen loaned the choker to the new Princess of Wales, and on Diana's long neck it became something else entirely. A defining piece of 1980s glamour, photographed hundreds of times at events across the globe. When Diana died in 1997, the choker entered a kind of emotional quarantine. It was too specifically hers. Too freighted with grief and memory, and the particular complicated legacy that Diana left behind. Catherine's decision to reach for this piece, first in 2017, then most memorably at the funerals of both Prince Philip in April 2021 and Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022, was an act of deliberate reclamation. The choker's quality of tightness, which the Queen had found physically stifling, Catherine deployed as a kind of psychological architecture. A choker holds the jaw high. It prevents the head from bowing under the weight of grief. At two of the most emotionally demanding public appearances of her life, Catherine used a piece that two previous royal women had set aside, one out of discomfort, one through death, and transformed it into a symbol of the monarchy holding steady. She took a rejected gift and turned it into a uniform. If there is a single piece that illustrates the distance between Elizabeth's aesthetic and Catherine's, it may be the Queen Mother's sapphire and diamond fringe earrings. These are not subtle objects. A central sapphire of deep velvety blue, surrounded by a halo of brilliant cut diamonds, from which descends a fringe of alternating baguette and round diamonds, mobile, glittering, possessing a rhythm that is purely of the Art Deco era. They move. They swing. They catch light at angles that demand attention. The Queen Mother adored them. In her long life, she wore them to theater premieres, private dinners, the kinds of late-night gatherings where she was known to keep the household going until the early hours. They were, for her, an expression of the joie de vivre that defined her private personality. When Elizabeth II inherited them, the earrings entered a drawer and stayed there. To her daughter they were too theatrical, too dramatic for a monarch who associated public life with solemnity and structure. Then in 2015, at a gala for the Victoria and Albert Museum, Catherine appeared wearing them. And the effect was startling, not because they looked out of place, but because they looked as though they had been made specifically for her. The sapphire at their center echoed the deep blue of Diana's engagement ring now on Catherine's finger. The Art Deco geometry suited her architectural aesthetic. They completed something. Since that debut, they have become one of Catherine's signature pieces, worn when she needs to project modern glamour rather than ancient formality. In choosing them, she demonstrated something important: that the Queen's rejects were not inferior objects. They were simply objects waiting for the right hands to find them. The Cartier Halo Tiara has one of the more quietly poignant stories in the collection. Made in 1936 and purchased by King George VI for his wife, it passed to Princess Elizabeth as an 18th birthday gift in 1944. A girl's first tiara. The beginning of a lifetime of ceremonial headwear. She never wore it publicly. Not once. As Queen, she had access to far more commanding pieces that communicated the full weight of sovereign authority. The halo, with its scrolling brilliance and halo of pave-set diamonds, was delicate, almost bridal in its feeling. It said beginning rather than established. It said hope rather than endurance. She loaned it to Princess Margaret, who wore it through her glamorous and turbulent young womanhood. Then to Princess Anne. And then for 4 decades it sat in the dark, too small for the big hair of the 1980s, too modest for the ostentation of the 1990s, too associated with an older era for the early 2000s. When the Queen offered it to Catherine for her wedding to Prince William in April 2011, the decision was, in retrospect, a masterpiece of institutional thinking. The halo had no Diana association. It carried no tragic freight. It was pure, a piece that had waited through 3 generations of Windsor women for the occasion that would fulfill its original purpose. A young woman not born royal becoming royal. A beginning. The Queen didn't wear it because she was never a beginning. She was always already the Queen. But she kept it safe, kept it perfect, for the woman who would need exactly what it offered. A clean slate framed in diamonds. Some objects carry reputations that outlast the people who created them. The lotus flower tiara came into being through an act of creative destruction. In 1923, the Queen Mother received a heavy diamond necklace as a wedding gift and found it uninspiring. Within months, she had taken it to Gerard and instructed them to dismantle it entirely. From its stones emerged something entirely different. A low-profile bandeau tiara of Egyptian-influenced lotus flowers and diamonds, sleek and modern in the manner of the early 1920s fascination with Egyptology following the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in November 1922. But it was Princess Margaret who truly made it famous, and who gave it its complicated legacy. Margaret, the younger sister who spent her life simultaneously too royal to be free and too unconventional to be fully contained by the institution, wore this tiara to parties, to evenings at the theater, to private dinners with the kind of people that palace officials preferred not to read about in the morning papers. She made it a symbol of a different kind of royal life, vivid, pleasure-seeking, and ultimately tragic. After Margaret's death in 2002, the tiara came back to the main collection and the Queen buried it. For Elizabeth, it carried too much of her sister's turbulent, painful history. When Catherine wore it to the annual diplomatic reception in 2013, the royal world took notice. The measured Duchess of Cambridge choosing Margaret's party tiara was unexpected, almost provocative. But the message Catherine was sending was clear. She could wear the rebel's crown without becoming the rebel. She could carry the glamour without carrying the chaos. When she wore it again in 2022, with a sleek, low hairstyle that stripped away all the 1960s drama and revealed the tiara's true geometric beauty, she completed the reclamation. The Queen had hidden it to protect the family's image. Catherine brought it back to strengthen it. Not all of what Catherine wears came from the Queen's vault. The Collingwood pearl earrings occupy a unique category. Pieces that are simultaneously personal property, emotional inheritance, and living memorial. Given to Diana as a wedding gift by the jewelers Collingwood in 1981, they are simple teardrop pearls suspended from diamond mounts. Classic, understated, worn constantly by the Princess of Wales throughout her public life. After Diana's death in Paris in August 1997, they entered a private safe. They were personal property, not crown jewels, not subject to the legal frameworks that govern the royal collection, belonging to Princes William and Harry. For years they existed in a kind of suspended state, too personal to donate, too painful to simply wear. When Catherine began wearing them, quietly, without announcement, at garden parties and school runs and official tours, it was not a performance of grief. It was something more intimate than that. It was incorporation. She made them part of her daily life in the way that you carry someone with you not by performing their memory, but by living it. The Queen naturally had no claim on these earrings and no need of them. They skipped her entirely, not because she didn't want them but because they belonged to a different line. They belonged to William. And Catherine, as William's wife and the mother of his children, is now their custodian. By wearing Diana's pearls to christenings and jubilees and quiet Tuesday engagements, Catherine ensures that the woman who never had the chance to meet her grandchildren is present for every significant milestone. It is perhaps the most human element of a very human jewelry story. The vault is not yet empty. There are pieces that remain in the dark, and the most significant among them may be the ones Catherine has not yet worn. The Empress Maria Fyodorovna sapphire choker, has one of the most dramatic origin stories in the collection. It was the personal property of Maria Fyodorovna, born Princess Dagmar of Denmark, who became Empress of Russia as the wife of Tsar Alexander III and the mother of Nicholas II. When the Russian Revolution swept away the Romanov dynasty in 1917 and 1918, Maria Fyodorovna escaped, partly through the intervention of her nephew, King George V, who sent a British warship to extract her from Crimea in 1919. She carried with her what she could. Some of her jewelry made it out of Russia in the hidden compartments of luggage. The sapphire choker, a geometric Art Deco piece featuring a central diamond and sapphire plaque on a strand of pearls, eventually found its way to Queen Mary, who added it to the royal collection. Queen Elizabeth II wore it occasionally briefly as a bracelet, never as the choker it was designed to be. Princess Anne has been its most recent royal wearer. But Anne is now in her mid-70s, and Catherine has spent a decade building a public identity anchored almost entirely in sapphire. Her engagement ring, Diana's oval sapphire in a halo of brilliance, established the color palette. The Queen Mother's fringe earrings extended it. Various sapphire brooches and necklace pieces have deepened it further. A Russian imperial sapphire choker that survived a revolution, crossed oceans, and outlasted the empire that created it sits at the precise intersection of everything Catherine has claimed as her visual signature. Sapphires, chokers, and history with weight. The royal collection does not dispose of things. It waits. And the most attentive observers of the court are watching for the moment when that particular darkness is finally brought back into the light. Step back far enough from any of these individual stories and a pattern emerges that is, in its way, more extraordinary than any single piece. Queen Elizabeth II reigned for 70 years. She had access to hundreds of objects of extraordinary beauty and historical significance. She wore, by comparison, remarkably few of them. For decades, the conventional explanation was personal taste. She was conservative, she was consistent, she knew what worked. All of that is true. But it is not the complete truth. The complete truth, as the evidence now suggests, is that Elizabeth was playing a game with a time horizon that extended well beyond her own life. She knew that jewelry worn constantly becomes associated only with its wearer. She knew that jewelry kept in careful reserve accrues a kind of magnetic power. When it finally emerges, it carries the weight of all the years it spent waiting. She knew, with the instinct of someone who had spent her entire life thinking institutionally rather than personally, that the monarchy's future would need objects that felt both historic and fresh. She was building a toolkit, not for herself, for the woman who would come after her. Whether or not she explicitly considered Catherine when making these choices, the result is the same. The Princess of Wales has inherited a collection of sleeping beauties, each one freighted with a story, each one kept in deliberate darkness so that when it finally emerged, it would feel like exactly what it was, a resurrection. The Queen Mother's roses, the Nizam's diamonds, the rebel's lotus crown, the choker worn as armor at 2 funerals, the tiara that waited a century for a dark-haired Englishwoman who married a prince and changed everything.